Hi, I'm Linda Mowell, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and our interviewer, Aimee Cardoso, speaks with curator Shirley Reece-Hughes about the exhibition Invented World of Valton Tyler. Now for Art This Week. Hi, I'm here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art with curator Shirley Reece-Hughes to talk about the exhibition Valton Tyler. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, how did this living Texas artist come to have an exhibition here at the Amon Carter?
Well, it started with a gift from local photographer David H. Gibson, who's been a longtime supporter of the museum. And he offered us this series of prints that Valton Tyler created at SMU in 1970. And we were thrilled to receive these works. And it's part of our ongoing mission to really give recognition to regional artists who haven't sort of received their due in the past or present. So it folded nicely into the museum's mission at this time to do a show on Valton Tyler, and the opportunity arose given the gifts and then the generosity of local collectors who were willing to loan their paintings to the show.
Valton grew up in a tumultuous time and kind of a stressful household. How do you think his upbringing comes through in some of his paintings and his works? Like, do you see these kind of little moments of anxiety or fear?
I do.
Okay.
I believe it's because, he was born in 1944 in Texas City, and in 1947, one of the worst environmental disasters in United States history occurred when a tanker in freight sort of exploded, had 2,000 tons of fertilizer exploded, and set off sort of just a range of fires and explosions. And although Tyler was 3, he recalls seeing the sky burning red, the flames, and I think a lot of times you'll see particles, things flying in Valton Tyler's prints that relate to that. But also I think his father fell into a deep depression after that incident, and it was a very stressful home life, so I think he retreated into his mind. Mm-hmm. And as he said, when he started drawing, just sort of letting his ideas flow into a notebook, he realized this was his calling, to draw, to be an artist.
He grew up learning the Protestant teachings of Christianity, and we see this explored in Crucifixion. Can you talk about that work and what other symbols are found in his later, more mechanical structures that might refer back to this ideology?
Well, that was actually, that's really only the direct translation of Tyler's beliefs. Okay. And what's interesting is, I think that when people look at his works, they're not going to think of them as sort of spiritual in the way that he does. Right. These are things he sees in his own mind. And when I interviewed him, when I asked him, what's your inspiration, he said it's the breath of God. Mm-hmm. And so by that, I think he means that he goes into sort of a spiritual meditative process, almost like a prayer, where he connects to what's going on in his mind and sees these worlds and sees these places that he puts down in his drawings and prints and paintings. But there are certain forms. It's a very sort of subtle iconography. There are forms that have very spiritual meanings, like the sphere, the rounded sphere that you see again and again in his work, that to him means human bodies, human heads, or creation in general. And then certain things like the trumpet horn that refers to the archangel. There's other things that have this very subtle reference to biblical passages like the horns, mm-hmm. which to him has a reference, a meaning of biblical power. But he inserts them in a way that it wouldn't be obvious to any viewer that it's religious iconography.
It's just kind of his own spiritual meditation.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's his own spiritual meditation. And as he describes it, he sees these images, these compositions in his mind, mm-hmm. and then he puts them down as he sees them. So it sort of comes to him in the process of a meditation.
His father was a mechanic, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you think a lot of these forms kind of are coming from seeing his father working on machinery?
Well, that's a great question. It sounds like his dad was sort of a Sunday painter, and he would paint on, obviously, whenever he could, and painted landscapes. Mm-hmm. He really was less of a mechanic. He worked in an auto body shop and worked with mixing paint colors.
Okay.
And so he had a real understanding of color. But what's interesting is I think his dad had very much sort of a scientific mind, and that's, I think, true of Tyler too, because when he first, before he actually started drawing, he was trying to design a leg, a human anatomy, sort of a leg where nerves connected, and then he tried to figure out a model for a spaceship. And so, you know, it's interesting that some of his heroes are people like Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo, sort of those Renaissance men who were not just artists but engineers. And I think a lot of times you see sort of these mechanical worlds in Tyler's prints where it looks like these mechanisms that come from his own mind, but to him, you know, they operate like a work that's called Pillow Machine that creates pillows.
So these prints in this exhibition were created from his time at SMU. How did he kind of get that connection there? What was, you know, how did that work?
That's a great question. He was actually very much struggling. He never had any formal training as an artist, and he had enrolled in Dallas Art Institute, but really only attended a few classes, which is more of a commercial art school. And so he was drawing, and it was his brother, Robert Tyler, who took his works to Valley House Gallery. And it was the founder of the gallery, Donald Vogel, who thought this young man has real talent, and wanted to sort of give him confidence and give him an opportunity to find another realm of expressing himself. So he set up the arrangement at SMU printmaking studio with Lawrence Shoulder, who was director of printmaking, sort of assisting him. And so Valton Tyler went there in 1970, and then he worked really almost for 2 years in the printmaking studio. Most of the prints come from 1970, but that he'd go back. And really without any formal training in terms of how to create a print, just started etching on the plates. And Lawrence Shoulder provided some guidance to him, but it was really Tyler himself who figured out how to create these amazing prints.
It was just intuitive for him.
It was very intuitive, and that's what's, I think, fascinating about him is everything's very intuitive. In fact, he learned to play classical music on the piano by ear. So very much an intuitive spirit who's able to connect to the various arts.
In this change, because he started out kind of primarily doing ink drawings or charcoal drawings.
Yes.
So in this change, going from ink to etching, what differences do we find in the work, not only technically, but in the visual imagery, or do we see any differences?
Well, I think we do. I think in the etchings, there's much more detail. There's much more linear detail. There's much more, I think it provided an opportunity for him to really kind of give more expression to his forms, the way that he saw them in very detail-oriented ways that sort of gave broader expression to his vision. And I think what was fascinating about it was it really gave him the confidence to try painting. At that point, you know, he had never tried painting, and most artists who are self-taught don't start out with oil on canvas. They start out with acrylic, you know, something that's easier to manipulate. He went straight into oil on canvas, and once again, his intuitive abilities really came through, where he just started experimenting with colors, and I think, you know, maybe some of that gifted from his father, that innate gift for understanding color and color relationships really came through in his early paintings, and then he just kept, as the show reveals, kind of expanding his scale of his paintings, which, you know, created these amazing monumental works.
Yeah, it's like the one behind us.
Yeah.
So going into the painting, whenever he's applying the paint, does he do an underdrawing or does he just go straight into it?
He does an underdrawing. Okay. So he first, you know, primes the canvas. Well, that's another interesting thing about Tyler is, I mean, he uses different layers of varnishes. He has this understanding that most self-taught artists don't, you know, have the ability to either know or experiment with. And so he does an underdrawing first and then starts applying the color. And when I interviewed him, I said, well, you know, how do you select your color? And he said, it's what Gauguin said, the shapes will tell you what color they want to be.
Wow.
So he, once again, works from that sort of intuitive perspective, looking at the form. And then a lot of times you see some similar colors that are very powerful to him, like the blue in this Give Us Sound behind us. You know, it's a reoccurring color for him, and it has quite a bit of power to it.
Do you see all of his works, the paintings, the drawings, the prints, do you see these all existing kind of in one story, or in like a mythology that he's created, like all together?
That's a great question. I think that his mythology kind of keeps evolving. What you see in the prints is much more mechanical, sort of engineer-like.
These are more kind of organisms.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he moved into this realm, I think, more of biomorphic abstraction, where that, I think, more directly related to what he was trying to create on the canvas and sort of that visual connection. I think the biomorphic, the organic world is a little more connected to the spiritual as he sees it.
I remember you talking about how certain things have slits to breathe. Is how he said that.
Yeah,
I asked him to breathe.
Yeah, I asked him. I said, "Why do your forms have slits?" And he said, "Well, they have to breathe." And so he sort of, everything is personified to him. You know, everything is living and spiritual. And so, yeah, that's part of his belief system that comes out. And what's amazing about this painting is, I mean, this speaks to his ability with color, is the way he's used the mustard yellow or the red and the reverberation that occurs between the two colors, and understanding that creates rhythm and movement that adds to this whole,
pull,
exactly, so to this whole sort of spiritual sensibility.
Tyler is quoted as saying, "I want to come as close as I can to sculpture without sacrificing the beauty and emotion of the etched lines." Has he ever considered crossing over into sculpture, or does he view his imagery as only existing in a two-dimensional form?
You know, I don't think he ever felt, that's a great question. I mean, his works, the forms are very much modeled and shaded like they're sculptural.
Right.
And I don't know that he ever felt the need to put them into 3 dimensions, or he felt he had the materials or the means to do it. I mean, it would be interesting with Tyler if he perhaps was given the means, he might have experimented with it. But sculpture's such a challenging sort of medium that you need, you know, certain materials, et cetera, to create it.
I think it'd be fun to see a sculpture by him, since, you know, it was so intuitive to each, you know, drawing, printing, painting. All of that was so intuitive to him with the forms. I think it'd be interesting to see sculpture by him, if and one day he ever does it.
Well, that's a good question.
Not that he needs to. I think these are beautiful on their own, but
it's interesting because there are other artists that I've interviewed that talk about that they felt like it had to move from painting into 3-dimensional form. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
We want to thank Shirley for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to cartermuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.